In November 2025, Australia's National Party unanimously voted to abandon the country's commitment to reaching net zero emission by 2050, a target they themselves had agreed to support just 4 years earlier. This reversal represents one of the most significant policy backflips in Australian political history and has fractured the Liberal National Coalition at a critical juncture. What makes this moment remarkable isn't simply the policy change, but the speed and completeness of the transformation. In October 2021, after intense negotiations, the Nationals provided in principle support for net zero, securing substantial regional investment in return. By November 2025, that same party voted unanimously to repudiate the commitment entirely. Understanding how Australia moved from bipartisan climate consensus to coalition collapse requires examining not just the political theater, but the substantial policy, economic, and international developments that intervene. The 2021 agreement came after what the ABC described as a week of public debate and commentary. Within the Nationals, Prime Minister Scott Morrison needed the junior coalition partners' support before attending the Glasgow Climate Summit. The deal was continuous from the outset. While the party room untimely agreed, the specific remained largely confidential. What we know about the 2021 arrangement reveals its fragility. The National secured several key concessions: 5-year productivity commission reviews of economic impact on regional communities, undefined but substantial investment in regional Australia, estimated at 20 billion, and critically, the elevation of Resources Minister Keith Pitt, a vocal net zero skeptic, back into cabinet. This promotion was particularly notable given that Pitt had voluntarily quit the ministry in 2018, stating, "I will always put reducing power prices before Paris." The Nationals' internal vote was closer than the 2025 unanimous decision suggests historical comfort with the policy. The 2021 margin was reportedly 12 votes to 9, a narrow victory secured largely through the regional funding package. Senator Matt Canavan voted against it even with concession, stating, "I was a no and I was not for sale." Yet, National Leader Barnaby Joyce declaring in Parliament, "The position is settled and we are going forward as coalition government." Critically, the net zero commitment was never formally debated or adopted by the joint Liberal National Party room. Multiple sources describe it as a captain's call by Morrison, imposed rather than negotiated across the full coalition. This procedural reality will later prove significant. What one leader could impose, another could reverse. Several measurable shifts occurred between the 2021 agreement and the 2025 reversal, creating the condition for policy abandonment. Electricity prices increased substantially. Estimated suggest rises exceeding 30% since the net zero commitment, with some regions reporting 39% increases. Labor's 2022 campaign promise of 275 annual reduction not only failed to materialize, but inverted, with prices rising by multiples of that figures. 24 of Australia's 28 coal-fired power stations announced closure dates, creating reliability concerning about baseload power supply during peak demand periods. The global net zero architecture weakened significantly. The United States withdrew from Paris Agreement under President Trump's return to office. Major emitters, including China and India, continue expanding coal usage despite climate commitments, with China alone adding more coal capacity than Australia's total emission footprint. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair declared net zero approaches doomed to fail, and Bill Gates, previously a prominent climate advocate, publicly recanted, stating climate change was not the biggest issue facing the world, and advocating poverty and disease prevention as bigger or higher priorities. The coalition lost the 2022 federal election. The Liberals lost multiple inner city seats to Thiel, independent despite, or perhaps because of their net zero commitment. By November 2025, polling showed the coalition at historic lows. 24% primary vote, the lowest recorded result, while One Nation surged to 15%, its highest ever, largely on an anti net zero platform. The electoral message was clear. The coalition position satisfied neither climate concerned urban voters nor cost conscious regional voters. The national 2025 position represents a carefully constructed policy argument, not simply climate denial. David Littleproud explicitly states, I believe that the man has made a contribution to climate change, and we should continue to make that commitment to reduce emission. This framing is crucial. The party characterized its position as abandonment as a specific target mechanism, not abandonment emission reduction entirely. The Nationals advanced several empirical claims. First, that Australia represents 1.1% of global emission and should peg its reduction effort to global average rather than exceeding them. They argue that for every lone Australian reduced, 90 more tons are adopted globally, rendering domestic sacrifice futile for climate outcomes while damaging economic competitiveness. Second, they emphasize adoption over mitigation. With Australia experiencing increasingly severe weather events, the National Climate Risk Assessment documents escalating bushfires, floods, and marine heat waves. The National argue limited resources should prioritize protecting community through infrastructure like dams, fire breaks, or coastal defenses, rather than attempting to influence global temperature trajectories Australia cannot meaningfully control. Third, they cite cost projection. The claimed 9 trillion price tag for reaching net zero by 2050 represent roughly 3 times Australia's current annual GDP. Whether these figures withstand security or scrutiny, it reflects genuine concern about economic viability and opportunity costs, funds that might otherwise support healthcare, education, or social services. The Liberals' moderates present a counter-argument center on international credibility and economic pragmatism. Senator Andrew Bragg acknowledged that National makes some good point about policy implementation failures, but argues Australia must maintain fidelity to our international obligation as a trade exposed nation where international relations ship matter economically. Australia export to countries implementing carbon border adjustment tariffs on products from nations without reverse climate policy, potentially costing Australian exporter market access. Bragg's position advocates policy reform rather than target abandonment, extending coal fired power operation timelines, expanding gas and potentially nuclear energy, adapting technology agnostic approaches, and learning from New Zealand model of exempting certain sector like agriculture. Critically, he notes that Paris Agreement might require net zero in the second half of this century, providing flexibility to reach 2050, 2060, or 2075, depending on technological and economic conditions. The progressive position articulated by Green Senator Sarah Hanson Young characterized that national decision as effectively dumping action on climate change and rendering the coalition a party that just not seriously about government. She argued climate impacts are already devastating regional Australia. The communities the nationals claim to represent and the renewable energy represents both environmental necessity and economic opportunity through job creation in manufacturing, installation, and maintenance sectors. This policy reversal creates immediate practical consequences across multiple dimensions that extend beyond partisan politics. Coalition viability. The fundamental question is whether the liberal and national parties can campaign together with contradictory climate position. If liberal maintains net zero and national reject it, what do voters understand they're voting for? Coalition agreements typically requires policy coherence. The current split might prove unsustainable, potentially forcing the party separation or leadership changes. As one political analyst noted, you can't be half pregnant on net zero. Regional Australia. The communities most affected by this debate face competing pressures: renewable energy infrastructures, transmission lines, solar farm, wind turbines, impact agriculture land, property values, viewscape, creating genuine local opposition. Simultaneously, this same community face the most severe climate impact: prolonged drought, catastrophic bushfires, and agricultural viability challenges. The adoption versus mitigation debate directly determines whether these communities receive infrastructure investment or emission reduction mandates. Energy system architecture. Australia's grid requires baseload of power as coal plants close. Currently, policy creates what critics call triple subsidization. Subsidization's renewable installation, then subsidization consumers against bill shock, then subsidization remain coal plants to maintain reliability. This model concern economists across the political spectrum as economically inefficient. The alternative architecture, whether gas, nuclear, or renewable, with storage or some combination, requires long term planning that policy uncertainty undermines. International trade relation. Australia's export markets increasingly incorporate climate consideration. The European Union has implemented carbon border adjustments. Asian trading partners pursue their own net zero pathways. If Australia is perceived as a climate laggard, trade access could suffer, particularly for agricultural export and manufacturing goods. Conversely, if Australia maintains commitment while competitors abandon them, Australian producers face comparative disadvantage from bigger domestic energy costs. Investment uncertainty. Major capital projects require decade long planning horizon. Energy infrastructure, mining, operation, manufacturing facilities, and agricultural investment all depend on regulatory certainty. The policy reversal creates uncertainty that might delay or prevent investment regardless of which position ultimately prevail. This economic drag from policy inability might exceed the cost of either policy path consistently pursue. Australia's net zero reversal illuminates fundamental tension in democratic governance, how societies balance competing priorities, honor international commitment while serving domestic interests, and make multi-generational decisions through election cycles, measuring success in years. The evidence suggests reasonable, informed people examining identical data reach different conclusions. Those prioritizing international credibility and long term risk mitigation view net zero as essential. Those prioritizing immediate affordability and economic competitiveness view it as unsustainable at current implementation costs. Those emphasizing regional vulnerability argue for adoption investment over mitigation spending that provides uncertain global benefits. What seems empirical clear is that Australia's current trajectory, escalating energy costs, supply reliability challenges, and missed emission targets satisfy almost no stakeholder. Whether the solution involves embodiment net zero, fundamentally reforming its implementation, or accelerating transition with different technologies remain contested. The Nationals' reversal from 2021 support to 2025 rejection provides unusual clarity. It demonstrates that the original consensus was transactional rather than principled, secured through financial endowments rather than genuine conviction. Perhaps this transparency, however uncomfortable politically, served democratic interests by forcing explicit public debate about Australia's climate and energy future, rather than maintaining a facade of agreement masking fundamental disagreement. Australian voters will untimely decide which approach reflect their priorities, but they can now do so understanding the actual policy division rather than manufactured unity that obscure the genuine choice at stake. This is Mika Santos, and welcome to Inside